Yeah, I did. I Good evening. All right. Good evening, everybody. Are we ready to go with TV? We're actually doing this as a TV show as well, so there's timing involved. Anyway, my name is Bruce Putterman. I am a Stamford native, born and raised here in Stamford, and I am the publisher of the Connecticut Mirror, and thank you. We have a number of team members, by the way, who are also Connecticut Mirror team members who work very hard every day to do what we do, which is to keep the public informed about what its government is doing that affects them and on issues that you all care about. We produce investigative reporting on government systems that aren't working and promises that aren't being kept by elected officials, public corruption, and we tell stories about life in Connecticut. We were founded in 2010. There were, to basically fill a void in journalism in Connecticut. The Hartford Current, the biggest newspaper in the state, had just laid off a massive number of people at that time, many in the State House covering state government and policy. So the Mirror was founded to kind of fill that gap. In 2019, there were 9 of us, and we had about a $1.2 million budget. Today, there are 29 of us and a $3.8 million budget. So I noticed from, kind of looking at the list of registrants that we have a number of people here who we are not aware of. And if you are being introduced to the Connecticut Mirror for the first time, welcome, and we hope that you'll take a peek at our website or at our newsletter. It's all free because we believe that to learn about your community and engage in democracy, you shouldn't have to pay for it. It should be a right. Thank you. So how do we make money? 90% of our money is contributed. Most of it from individuals, just like all of you, a little bit from local and national foundations. The other 10% is through advertising, and we license our content. You may see some of our stories in other newspapers that you read. So in any event, welcome to the Mirror. Take a look. Maybe at some point you'll sign up for our free newsletter, which summarizes the story headlines of the last 24 hours. Maybe at some other point you'll decide you like us enough and you want to support nonprofit journalism that you'll make a donation. No pressure, no ask. Just that's how we continue to thrive and to grow. So now I'd like to introduce longtime Connecticut Mirror events moderator, podcast host, and all-around management consultant to me, John Dankosky. And John is also a longtime public radio news director and talk show host as well. And John, I'll let you introduce our special guest. So thank you everybody for coming.
Thank you so much, Bruce. Nice round of applause for Bruce Putterman. As someone who's worked in public radio for a long time, wasn't that a great pitch for nonprofit journalism? Very nicely done, Bruce. And there wasn't even a 1-800 number involved. I want to thank you all for coming to this very special event. It's part of a series that we're doing. It's called In the Room, the Connecticut Mirror's monthly series of in-person conversations with Connecticut political leaders. I want to thank the folks at the Ferguson Library. Nice round of applause for this amazing facility in the heart of downtown Stamford. We have a sold-out crowd here, and that's such a great thing. Thank you all for coming out. I understand parking in Stamford isn't great, but yet somehow or other you made it here, so thank you so much for that. If you'd like to register for future events, go to ctmirror.org/events, and that way you can register. Some folks who registered in advance were also able to send in some questions. I'll get to as many of your questions that you send in advance as possible, because we did get a few. I don't know, Jim Himes, there's a few things going on in the world that they want to ask you about. Please, as Bruce said, do consider a donation to support nonprofit journalism. I'd like to thank the generous financial support of Connecticut Mirror's supporters here. There's sponsors who help to make this program possible, including Eversource, our presenting sponsor, CBIA and the Mohegan Tribe, Express Strategies, Hinckley Allen, Rowthorne Law LLC, and the Causeway Agency. I've gotten all of the ads out of the way, Jim Himes. Welcome, Congressman Jim Himes. Thank you so much for being here. There are so many places we could start this conversation, but let me just start. It's been a while since I've sat down with you, and I used to talk to you all the time when I was a public radio talk show host, and you were brand new to Washington at that time. You'd spent more of your career on Wall Street than you had in Washington back when I first got to know you, and now you've spent quite a bit of time in Washington. What has changed in your thinking about how America works, having the experience that you've had now in Washington for these many years?
Yeah, wow, well, that's a big question to start off. First of all, thank you, John, and thanks, CT Mirror, Bruce. It's funny, I get to ask this question 10 times a day. What can we do in the face of creeping authoritarianism? And somewhere on that list is support your local media. And thank you for doing that. I'm just so astonished. I really thought we were going to get, 50 people here, but here, in the Instagram era, we've got a great crowd, and I understand roughly this many online as well. So what do I know now that I didn't know then? It's the distance between the two bookends are about. It's about as wide as it can be, because I came to Washington in January of 2009 when this country had just elected its first African-American president. And there was this moment, it lasted about 2 months, there was this moment when even my Republican colleagues were so proud of what this nation had done, how far it had come. And then, of course, we reverted to the usual kind of partisan stuff. In some ways that was okay. If you remember back in 2009, that was a moment of optimism amidst some brutal economic realities. That first quarter of 2009, the economy contracted by 10%. People were losing their jobs. And when I say people, this district, New Canaan, Darien, Greenwich, but some enormously challenged Bridgeport, urban areas with real poverty, and everybody was suffering because of that meltdown in 2008, 2009. But nonetheless, this incredibly optimistic moment, and now here we are, where we're wondering whether the president, in his heart, doesn't want to be a king, and we're wondering whether tomorrow he's going to show the open defiance of the court that we haven't seen in this country since Andrew Jackson did that in 1834. Our politics has become ugly, really ugly. I mean, politics have always been tough, but more Americans than ever before, some 40% think that violence is okay in certain circumstances. More Americans than ever before don't want their children marrying people of the opposite party. More Americans, all Americans, are spending all their day thinking about politics, right? A healthy society is a society in which people, your average person out there thinks about politics, 20 minutes a week. And the old left-right fight has been obliterated by something introducing another dimension, right? And that's populism, MAGA, if you will. There's populism on the left, too. It's just not in the Oval Office right now. And so now you have a Republican president who is doing everything that is different, in fact, the opposite of what a traditional Republican, Ronald Reagan and the traditional Republican Party liked immigration because it kept wages down. They didn't like government interference in the economy. Okay there?
Make sure.
Okay. Yeah. The cruelty is the point. And that's something that is very new and very ugly. And I could go on. I'm not going to go. No. But let me throw out two other words. Yeah. Social media changed everything.
So social media changed everything. I mean, we could do an entire hour on just how social media has changed everything. But what specifically do you mean by that? In your job, in your role right now in Congress, I mean, how do you view that?
It changed things 15% for the good, because now, and I'm looking out here and I see a lot of friends, a lot of people I've talked to about a lot of issues, now in real time, on whether it's Twitter feed or Instagram or via email, I can get a feel for where people are. And that's my job at the end of the day, trying to do my best to represent a very diverse group of people with lots of different opinions. So social media is good in the sense that you can actually have a real-time dialogue with the people that you represent. That's 15%. The other 85% is that we've gone from a country that had some shared idea of reality. When I was a kid, 3 channels, ABC, NBC, CBS, every one of those channels had a middle-aged white dude trying to pitch it down the middle, right? Some version of Walter Cronkite. Lots of reasons why that is not optimal, but, we had a shared set of facts. And now we consume, I learned, by the way, 6 months ago, that young people, their number one news source is YouTube. I think of myself as a little bit social media forward. I did not know that. But what has happened, to make a very long story short, is that we no longer consume information in order to be critical thinking citizens. We consume information to scratch our political itches. So we all just watch the set of facts or set of myths that make us feel good politically, and that makes politics very hard to do.
Okay, so shouldn't then, because of the corrosive influence that you just suggested, shouldn't Congress do something about the people that run the companies that push the social media down everyone's throats?
It's very satisfying to give the political answer and say, yes, we should act now. At the core of this country is the notion that you're all citizens and that the government does not get to tell you what information it wants you to see. And that's, of course, incorporated into the First Amendment. And it's a huge problem. By the way, it's why I voted against. I'm the ranking member of the Intelligence Committee. There are very few people around who know what China can do via platforms like TikTok, but there was no way I was going to vote in favor of a ban on TikTok, because there's no way the government of the United States should be telling the citizens of the United States, you don't get to look at this stuff. And so it's a really hard problem, and I think the answer is twofold. Number one, while we can't get into the business of saying this algorithm doesn't work for the government, this is information you shouldn't see, we can be in the business of saying if you have an algorithm that gets young pre-adolescent women in a suicidal frame of mind over body image issues, and a young woman takes her own life, and I'm talking about a specific court case right now, you will be liable. You will be liable for that, so that there is a mechanism for accountability. And then the other thing we need to do, which sounds sort of woo-woo, but it's really important, we all need to take our obligations as citizens a little more seriously than we do. And look, I'll be the first to say that 11 o'clock at night, if I don't have a good book going, I'm sitting there looking at TikTok, and that is a pathological behavior. And so what do? You know what? I read the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal. I'm not going to tell you I love it, but I read it just because I got to have somebody whispering in my ear, you're not always right.
Okay, so you don't think government should tell people that they can't look at TikTok? Should the U.S. government tell Meta that it shouldn't allow falsehoods, absolute lies to be perpetrated on the platform? It's a platform that reaches billions of people, and essentially it is purveying information that is the opposite of true, and it's very damaging to people. Just as damaging as the instance that you talked about with the young woman who took her own life.
No, full stop. Full stop. With the exception that, and this is where the Trump administration is dismantling something that I do think is a good idea, which is when somebody goes online and says that, for example, drink bleach to fix COVID, the government should be up there with specific and technical facts to say that this is not true. But 90% of our civic dialogue is not empirically observable, true or false. Social Security is a Ponzi scheme, to just throw out one of those things that people get in trouble for saying. That's an outrageous statement. But it is also true that Social Security is taking money from people today and paying it out to other people. And so is that statement true or false? Medicare is unsustainable, a statement which is both true and false at the same time. And the really interesting questions aren't about what's the speed of light, where there is an answer. The really interesting questions are normative. They're things in which we have different opinions on, and we cannot live in a country where the government says to pick up on today's issue, that a university can't have a DEI program. That's where government saying this is true and this is false leads.
Okay, so you mentioned the Intelligence Committee. This is, of course, one of the most pertinent things that we can talk about today. Ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, you have access to an awful lot of stuff that I think a lot of people in this room would like to know more about. The most important thing I think I'll just ask off the top is, what are the greatest threats currently to U.S. intelligence, and are they internal or external?
I said this, some of you will have seen it. Twice a year we do an open hearing. It happens, not our usual way of operating, but we'll do an open hearing, which is worldwide threats. And my opening statement to Tulsi Gabbard was, of course I worry about everything. I worry about, the Russians have nuclear weapons, they're a completely rogue state right now, the Chinese, Iran, you name it. As I said to Tulsi, the call is coming from inside the building. The threat to us right now is the destruction of those things which keep us safe. And there's a lot of things on that list. Somewhere in the federal government, I don't know a lot about this stuff, but somewhere in the federal government, there are a whole bunch of people who are watching Ebola in Africa right now. Because there's indicators that say that if it gets this many people in Africa, it's coming here. And they were thinking about the stuff that we thought about to get a vaccine against COVID. They're fired now, right? Because Elon Musk thinks they're a bad idea. Tulsi Gabbard and the director of CIA are publicly saying that the intelligence community was weaponized against the American people. Flat out lie. So what happens? What happens is those analysts at CIA or wherever that, are making, I don't know what they make, $120,000 a year, who could make twice that in the private sector, just finally say, screw it, I'm going to the private. So all of this stuff is making us less safe, and it's coming from inside the building. The second thing I would say, and I've always, two other quick things. Number one, it's never the thing that you think it is. If I told this crowd 10 years ago that something is going to emerge and it's going to kill World War II era numbers of Americans, 1.3 million Americans, and it's going to be something called CV-19. You guys would be like, wait a minute, is that a Russian weapon system? What is that, right? And we weren't thinking about the thing that killed over 1 million Americans. Third thing to say, the long-term risk to us right now, and this has implications for what Elon Musk is doing, the really long-term risk to this country is that we lose our that we lose our innovative capacity, that we're now number 7 in developing AI instead of number 1. We're number 9 instead of number 1 in developing the next cure and the next vaccine. And oh, by the way, whatever, things you need to do to counter genetically modified bugs that somebody cooks up. And that to me is the real threat to this country.
What do you think about the people that President Trump has installed atop the agencies that you oversee? You mentioned Tulsi Gabbard and others. I mean, do you think that there are people in charge right now who oversee the intelligence of America who know what the hell they're doing?
I don't want to start dissecting individuals. I will tell you that in my world, in the intelligence world, there are some people in whom I have confidence and some people in whom I don't. And by the way, let me be the first to say, maybe that doesn't matter. And why do I say that? Some of you in this room will remember that I made an unwise comment that I was 1,000% wrong about on CNBC's Squawk Box 2 months ago when I said, well, these guys Bessent and Howard Lutnick, they've been operating around the economy for a while, so I got a certain amount of confidence that they're going to get the economic stuff right. Totally wrong. And the reason I tell you that story is that it doesn't matter whether they're good or bad. By the way, the good ones, the really technically advanced good ones, like General Hawk, who was fired from the NSA. NSA, by the way, is a very big entity that surveils phones and texts and emails. This guy was a 4-star and a Boy Scout, and they fired him because Laura Loomer had some hallucination. But the point I'm trying to make here is that it almost doesn't matter, because what has happened is that all of these people have been put into into a circus-like environment in which rules don't matter, competency doesn't matter. What matters is whether you sort of come off as a testosterone-infused tough guy. I'm thinking of the Secretary of Defense right now. To the point where, let me illustrate this with one other story. Signalgate, right? Oh my God.
There's applause in the room. As though
That's not your usual applause line. So Mike Waltz, who I know...
was he going to talk about Signalgate? Yes, he did. Go ahead, please.
Well, you see two things in Signalgate. Number one, read the texts, right? And you have the Secretary of Defense doing something that every 12-year-old boy will recognize, right? Which is 0800 MQ-9s launching loaded targets, blah, blah, blah. Just the testosterone just flows. And, that's just not a good state of mind for the Secretary of Defense, right? By the way, totally unnecessary. Cabinet secretaries don't communicate operational details in the moment. But the point I'm trying to make is this. when you get into, humans are humans. You put them into a context where the rules don't matter, where competence doesn't matter, where there is no accountability, good people do dumb things. Mike Waltz. Mike Waltz was a Green Beret. Now, Green Berets go through some of the toughest, most rigorous training there is because they do really dangerous things, and they follow the rules, and they operate in an environment of brutal accountability because when you get dropped behind enemy lines or whatever, you got to be doing. Mike Waltz is about one of the most responsible guys that I served with in the Congress, and you put him in this clown show, and now he's not only setting up an illegal signal chat, he's inviting Jeffrey Goldberg of the Atlanta to join it. So it almost doesn't matter whether these people are competent or not because they're just in a circus.
So let's get back to that, because I think a lot of people who want to think that there are some guardrails around something would listen to you say, there are some good people here. There are some people that you trust within this system. Are you saying that, unlike maybe even the previous Trump administration or other administrations that you've been part of, that the good people who actually know what the heck they're doing can't have an impact, don't have anybody listening to them? I mean, is that what I hear you saying?
There's a lot fewer good people. And again, I want to be careful about using the word good. I mean, the classic is that, Gary Cohn in Trump 1, he kept the guy under control. Mark Milley apparently kept the president in his first term from invoking the Insurrection Act, which gives him the authority to deploy the 82nd Airborne on America's streets, right? So there are a lot fewer of those people around, and they're a hell of a lot more scared because they saw what happened to Mark Milley. Not only was Mark Milley fired, he was accused of treason by the President of the United States. So there's a lot fewer of those people around, and they're a lot more scared. And they're not, I think they've made a bargain with themselves that I'm just along for this ride, and I'm not going to, I'm not going to be the next, Gary Cohn who gets fired.
Okay, so let's get back to Signalgate specifically, because again, from the intelligence community standpoint, I think it's important to just sort of pull apart, is this like a crazy, stupid circus that we should, that we're going to talk about on CNN or whatever, and people will kind of laugh about here? Or is it like a serious, important breach that lessens other countries' confidence in America to keep secrets? I mean, is it a big deal, or ain't it that big a deal in your mind?
It's a very big deal. It's a very big deal. I mean, let's at the most granular level. And this is where I kept saying, thank God pilots didn't die, right? So at a very grand, we'll talk more about the culture that leads to it, and that's a big deal too. But, back to the NSA, the Chinese and the Russians in particular have NSA-like qualities, and they have the technology that and by the way, I promise you, Mike Waltz is probably he's definitely top 5 targets for the Russians and the Chinese. They could have gotten that. And if they had gotten that and decided to do it, they could have passed it to their contacts in Yemen. Now, any military people in the room will know that an anti-aircraft battery, if it's alerted to the fact that something's going to happen tonight, you don't need to know that it's an MQ-9 or an F-18. You just need to know that something's coming tonight. These things are very capable. They could have shot down pilots. So yeah, no, it was deadly serious, and thank God that didn't happen. But again, what troubles me more is just the ethic. This is not what happens in government. A bunch of boys, doing testosterone chats to each other with emojis. I mean, if nothing else, the act of taking other humans' lives, which is what happened that day, is not something that lends itself to emojis and backslaps and that stuff. And if you've got the temperament that is going to use emojis and show off in some testosterone-addled craziness while you're killing other human beings, you shouldn't be anywhere near the United States government.
So if you would, take us inside your conversations with other members of the House Intelligence Committee, Republicans and Democrats, most of whom I assume get what you just said as the truth on some level, right? What are those conversations like? How do you tackle this? How do you think about what's Congress's role here as this circus plays out?
Yeah, that's a really complicated question, mainly because the oversight that committee does cannot be public. And believe me, I've personally thought about this, and I don't want to make this about me, but I've sort of personally thought about this because 24/7, I'm thinking about what is my role in resisting what's happening. Well, one of my roles is a traditional oversight role. And I don't believe that this would happen, but if the president orders the CIA, which is an operational entity, unlike the Office of the Director of National Intelligence or the NSA, the CIA has people with guns who do very dangerous things. And if the president were to order the CIA to operate against an American inside the U.S., and by the way, not crazy far-fetched, right? Nixon did this in the early 1970s, which led to the formation of my committee. I would try to do behind closed doors what I would have to do, but in all likelihood, I would have to take a microphone, go in front of a camera, and commit a felony, which is to say disclose classified information. So yeah, I've thought a little bit about this. So what are the conversations? One of the attributes of this political moment is that there are traditional Republicans. I would tell you it's half of the, what have they got now, 222 or something. Half of them are pretty traditional Republicans who, are small government guys. They were pro-immigration and they were pro-free trade. This is Wall Street Journal forever. And they just are very, very quiet because they raise their head above the parapet and Donald Trump takes them down. The good news is we're starting to see that crumble a little bit, right? So these tariffs, which were rolled out in the most catastrophic fashion conceivable, caused a whole bunch of Republican House members and Republican Senate members to say, we got to take back some of our tariff authority because we delegated it to the president. And I was like, wow, because that was really the first public indication of Republicans willing to break with this, dear leader type. The devastation of the stock market is going to accelerate that. My Republican friends are learning right now what they signed up for when they signed up for $880 billion of cuts to Medicaid. A lie can sustain itself for so long, like, waste, fraud, and abuse, waste, fraud, we're going to cut it from waste, fraud, and abuse. The cuts they're talking about would take 20% of the federal expenditure on Medicaid. Hospitals close, community centers close, grandma gets kicked out of the assisted living facilities. So now they're learning what they signed up for, and they don't like it at all. Which is why you saw, a dozen of them send a letter to the speaker saying, we were just kidding. No Medicaid cuts, please.
Okay, so but it doesn't seem as though enough of them are going to line up to do anything about it, and so Democrats probably are going to have to provide the resistance to what you've said. So what's your decision-making process when thinking about how you place yourself in that resistance? A lot of your colleagues, Chris Murphy is certainly one who's been very, very public, whether it's Bernie Sanders or AOC, other people have different ways of thinking about how they're going to oppose what's happening right now. How do you think about how Jim Himes is going to approach that question?
Yeah, great question, and an immensely frustrating question. First of all, on the premise, again, they've got a 4-seat majority. They lose 4 people and they're done. And I think they're going to lose 4 people. I can name them, right? Nicole Maliotakis in Staten Island, Mike Lawler just 10 miles from here. They're going to lose those folks because the dynamic they're into now is, okay, I can oppose Donald Trump and he might end me, or I can cut Medicaid the way I said I would, and that will end me. So not a happy political place to be, but the optionality is pretty clear for those guys. So yeah. Now look, the answer to your question is really a hard one, and it's hard to say to my fellow Democrats and to my activist friends and everything. The American people decided last November that we would be in the minority in the House and we would be in the minority in the Senate and that the president would be Donald Trump. And at least in the House, and we got to start with that as, unless we want to go the Trumpian route, we got to respect that fact. We don't need to like it, but you got to respect that fact, because if you don't respect that fact, you don't ask yourself the question, which is how the hell did that happen? And I promise you we're not fixing this unless we answer the question, how the hell did that happen? But in the House in particular...
Remind me to ask you that later.
Yeah,
go ahead, please.
Great. Back to Signalgate. In the House, the minority has a couple of tools, none of which are particularly satisfying. I can do what I do with my bully pulpit. I was 5 minutes on the floor the other day talking about a young man in Ridgefield whose life will be ended if Medicaid is cut. I can go on MSNBC like I feel like I do every day or whatever. There is a bully pulpit quality to this. And I can sign up to amicus briefs, which I do because we support one of the two things really pushing back now, which is the courts and the judiciary. And then here's a category which is harder, which is there's so many people out there that are scared right now. How can I support and guide them? Which is, on one hand, like answering the question, what can I do right now, to simply listening and trying to respond to it in a constructive way, trying to be both reassuring and motivating. So that's all really pretty unsatisfying stuff. And sometimes I feel like my supporters and activist friends believe that there's just a button somewhere that Dad, if I would just push that button, things would be okay. But, you know, there is no button.
I think that the difference that I certainly heard from an awful lot of Democrats and a lot of more progressive Democrats is that we talk an awful lot about the norms that have been shredded, the defiance of the courts, the things that you just laid out in the first 15 minutes of our conversation that seem to depart from anything that looks like the government that any of us signed up for or would like to see. And they say, look, why do we have to play like this and say, well, they won the House, they won the White House, when the other guys essentially are just not playing by the same playbook at all. And I think a lot of Democrats are saying that's why we lose. We lose because you don't do the things that Trump does to get the power that he has.
Look, if I need to be a bigot and a racist, and if I need to create Latinos, the undocumented, as a scapegoat, if I need to put out the addresses of federal judges, I'm getting out of this business. I might even get out of this country. Because if this country has become so indecent and so appalling that we celebrate the notion of going to the least common denominator, I don't want to be part of it.
But it's not saying be more Trumpy. It's essentially saying the opposite. It's that you have to stand up no matter what to fight for people who feel as though they're being actually oppressed at this moment. You know.
So let's split that conversation into policy and politics. Politics is a little harder because of the nature of our coalition. The policy, I was in Union Hall 3 weeks ago, and a young union member said to me, why has the Democratic Party become the party of the coastal elites and you don't care about working people or the poor and everything? And I mean, I lost my mind because I've been doing this now for 17 years, and each and every single one of those years, starting with the passage of the Affordable Care Act, which covered 20 million Americans with health insurance, starting with the Lilly Ledbetter Act, which made it illegal for people to pay women less than they pay men, moving on to the rescue plan that rescued this economy in 2009, you know, going on to the first time ever in the IRA 4 years ago that we said the government will negotiate prescription drug prices, to the biggest investment in climate change, to damn it with the unions, to the Bush-Lewis Act, which rescued the pension. This is not an elite out-of-touch party. This is a policy record that is pretty stunning. Now, my progressive friends say, but you didn't do single-payer health care. Got it, I understand. You know, this country has a political system that is incremental. Now, it frustrates the bejesus out of me, too, but that is a sterling policy record, all of which is pointed to, let's just, whatever way you want to analyze it, the bottom 50% of the nation, economically, however you want to think about it. Meanwhile, what's the one accomplishment they did on the other side? The one major legislative accomplishment was to pass a tax cut in 2017, which delivered 83% of its dollars to the top 1% in this country. So do not tell me that the Democratic Party, look, we could be better, and you heard me say something very self-reflective, which is ask yourself, how the hell did this happen? But on the policy front, I will fight that all day long. The politics are much more complicated, right? Because this is a party that extends from AOC and Bernie Sanders, fairly prominent folks these days, to Joe Manchin. Boo, no Joe Manchin. Without Joe Manchin, the Republicans control the Senate. So be angry at Joe Manchin, fine. Be angry at Joe Manchin, but you know what we need Joe Manchin to do? We need him to avoid a Republican Senate. So anyway, you get my point here is that spectrum makes it very, very hard to satisfy. Two things.
Okay.
All right, I'm gonna,
Go ahead.
two things really quickly. What do we need to do right now? Because you asked me, what do I do? Number one, yes, we absolutely need to keep our activists engaged. I'm thrilled that, Bernie and AOC and Corey that was wonderful symbolically, by the way. Apart from the fact that he did something good, the fact that he overtook Strom Thurmond's anti-civil rights speech was just magnificent. But this stuff that makes people feel like, quote unquote, we're standing up, even if it's symbolic, and a lot of it is largely symbolic, is important. But the other thing we need to do, okay, keep the activist base happy, absolutely important. The other thing we need to do, we damn well better take the House of Representatives. And that happens in Pennsylvania and in the Hudson Valley and in North Carolina with a group of people. And I talked to, Murray Glusenkamp Perez in rural Washington a lot about this. And I talked to Pat Ryan in the Hudson Valley, and they say, Chuck Schumer shaking his fist out in front of a federal agency that no one's ever heard of, that actually doesn't help me much. And so that's the two things we have to do, and sometimes they're at cross purposes with each other.
Okay, so along all these lines of what you just said, can I ask you about your decision to vote to censure your Democratic colleague Al Green for his outburst during the president's speech? When I think I have this right, you were one of 10 Democrats who voted to censure him. You said that there was a deeper principle at stake. Could you explain what that was?
Yeah. I can probably do that more comfortably than when I spent 2 hours explaining it to the Connecticut NAACP, which was not my favorite moment. But and I say that not to be smart alecky about it. The element of this that was very, very hard, and this is just sort of my observation from dozens of conversations, was that my African American constituents were badly hurt by that vote. And I don't pretend, not being African American, to fully understand the sentiments and the emotions that are behind that. I did get a pretty good taste of it that night with the NAACP. But I still feel strongly about this, and that is, forget about decorum or dignity. That stuff's off the table. But the rules matter. And Americans having some confidence that their leadership believes in the rules and aren't hypocritical and have some semblance of principle is important. And in 2009, September of 2009, when Joe Wilson didn't stand up, when he shouted at President Barack Obama, "You lie," this awful, awful moment, the next day I voted to sanction Joe Wilson. So when Al Green, who's a good friend, and I have a ton of respect for him, stood up and raised a lot more hell than Joe Wilson did, I didn't know how I would explain to somebody, I will vote to sanction Joe Wilson, but I won't vote to sanction my guy. That reeks of an absence of principle and a disrespect for the rules. Now, it's a silly rule. Not a silly rule. It's a small rule. This is not a law. But too much of America believes that its leadership doesn't believe that the rules apply to it. They only apply. This is the signature of Donald Trump. The rules don't apply to me. And you asked a really important question that I've thought a little bit about, which is, and you clarified, you said, no, we want people to stand up and fight. But all too often I hear, you need to go low. You need to break the rules. And I shudder at that. Because, first of all, every social movement that you can name succeeded not because they went low, but because they maintained an ethical sensibility. Mandela in South Africa, Gandhi in India, Martin Luther King, they preached nonviolence. They were about being ethically better than the evil that they confronted. And secondly, we don't want to go there.
But they also stood in front of people who would harm them on locked arms in order to make a point. They disrupted, right? I think the point of perhaps some would think Al Green did, is very consistent with those that you just mentioned. It's a disruption to cause a reaction against something that he felt was not right. I think a lot of people think there's no difference, right?
Yeah. No, and by the way, that's a very fair point. I don't disagree with that. And we're now into the realm of thinking about civil disobedience. And so I agree with you 100%. He said this. He said, I'm going to make some good trouble. He was, of course, channeling John Lewis. And that's fine. That's fine as an act of civil disobedience. But then, and again, this gets a little legalistic, but there's two elements of civil disobedience. You disobey an unjust law. This was a house rule. But nonetheless, you disobey an unjust law, and then you happily accept the consequences for doing so. What you don't do is break an unjust law and then seek to avoid the consequences. So I understand that this gets a little legalistic, but to say that the perfect outcome is that Al engages in civil disobedience, but then it's good that we shield him from the consequences is a little bit hypocritical, a little bit contrary to the tradition of civil disobedience, and propagates the notion that the rules only matter when the other side breaks them.
I'll just ask you one last question about this, which is, after your conversation, your uncomfortable conversation with the NAACP, talking with other constituents, do you regret anything about that vote? Do you regret anything about the way that you defended it? Has your mind changed at all since then?
I was caught off guard, and this is a serious thing for a representative. I was caught off guard by the pain that this caused my African-American constituents. And as a politician, I'm supposed to be good at not getting caught off guard and having a really good intuitive feel, even for communities that I'm not a part of. And so to this day, and I apologize to the NAACP for missing that. But again, you can tell I've got a very serious concern about a society that perceives its leaders as being inconsistent about the rules, and I shudder sometimes because again I don't every day I hear somebody say, you got to set aside the rules. In a world where Marjorie Taylor Greene gets to be disrespectful of Joe Biden and Al Green doesn't, that's not a good. But then where's the end of that? I was in the chamber on January 6, 2021. In fact, Rosa DeLauro and I were two of the last people out of that chamber. I have seen up close and personal the violence and the rage and the horror that comes from people who are so convinced of their righteousness that they will break a window to get into the Capitol and assault 140 police officers. I am a little scared about the passion involved in the sense of righteousness that enables me to break rules. And by the way, purely pragmatic here, I've seen these people. You do not want to go onto a playing field with a MAGA guy in a pickup truck with an AR-15. A rule of the jungle America is not one where democratic activists survive that. Because that guy with an AR-15 is going to kill you. And so anyway, you hear me saying we must maintain a fundamental respect for the law and the rules, which is where civil disobedience comes from. I mean, these thinkers around civil disobedience said you must break an unjust law because unjust laws should be broken, but then you need to tip your hat. You need to sort of bow to the notion that the law is not lightly broken.
We got this question from a Connecticut Mirror reader. What happens if the president does not abide by the Supreme Court's ruling on the man wrongly deported to El Salvador? Again, essentially, the court has said that the administration has to facilitate bringing this gentleman back. Of course, the Trump administration has pushed back. It's unclear if they'll actually comply. This is not the only way in which the Trump administration has pushed back against court rulings. So what happens? What happens if the president says, I don't have to listen to the Supreme Court?
So today, the Fourth Circuit, with Judge Wilkinson, who is a Reagan appointee, wrote a scathing attack on the Trump administration's legal arguments that doesn't have to bring him back. And I put it up on Twitter because it was true poetry. I mean, it brought tears to my eyes. So this goes to the Supreme Court in all likelihood, and what if the president takes the consequential step of saying, I don't care, You know, this is Andrew Jackson in 1834. Mr. Marshall has rendered his decision, now let him enforce it. The remedies, I think, are a couple. Number one, and we're already starting to see courts prepare to do this. The court in Maryland and Boasberg's court are setting the stage for holding the people who are ignoring their orders in contempt. Two kinds of contempt. Criminal contempt, which requires DOJ prosecution, although you probably heard Boasberg say, I'll appoint a special prosecutor to do this if I need to. It's a little problematic because let's imagine somebody's held in criminal contempt, they're convicted, you know what the president does, pardons them. Civil contempt is unpardonable, so the president cannot pardon somebody who's been held in civil contempt. Civil contempt is a pretty big deal. If you're a lawyer and you've been involved, you get disbarred. If you're an individual, you're the pilot who flew the plane to El Salvador, they'll go after your wages, they'll fine you, they'll go after your assets. And so the entire line from the president on down, now the Supreme Court has decided that our president is absolutely immune, everyone else is not. And when they start getting fined, when they start getting disbarred, I think this becomes very, very serious for those people. And then the other thing, and this brings us back to the activists, we're not the first country that has lived under authoritarianism, and there is a playbook out there. It's a playbook that was written in Turkey, that was written in Chile in the 1970s. You know, you have mass mobilizations, you have protests, you have boycotts, the public will really matters. Now, it's sort of funny to have to think in those terms because we think, oh, we're doing a rally in support of reproductive rights. That's great. No, this is a different thing. This is public mobilization in the service of saying we are moving back to a democratic system.
Another reader wrote to us, sort of along these lines, it says, do you believe that Congress is still a co-equal branch of our government?
It's not now. It's a wholly owned subsidiary of Donald Trump, Inc., right? I mean, it just is, right? But it's evolving. I won't repeat myself, but, you know, Republicans coming to realize what's about to happen to them on Medicaid, the tariffs, the catastrophic rollout of tariffs. So you're starting to see those cracks form. And if they had a 70-seat majority, I would tell you it's hopeless. It's hopeless. Doesn't matter if we pick up 40 people. But we only need to pick up 4 people in the Senate. You already have Lisa Murkowski of Alaska raising all kinds of hell. So it's a wholly owned subsidiary, but 2 weeks from now, depending on, you know, our automobiles, $1,000, $2,000 more expensive, you're going to start to see the Congress, and I'm talking about Republicans in Congress right now, starting to stand up and saying, I'm going to actually go back to being a check and a balance.
But does this point, I mean, you talk about a playbook, I mean, does this point to the possibility, maybe not during this term of this administration, maybe not in the next couple of years, but does it point to an America in which Congress matters less if you have an executive branch that is able to do whatever it wants? If it can defy the courts, what does it matter if there's 3 branches of government, right? I mean, do you see that as someone who spent this much time in Washington, do you see that actually as a realistic possibility for the first time?
Yeah. That is obviously the president's desire. His desire is to have untrammeled power. This is why he likes Putin. This is why he likes Xi, right? These are men with unconstrained power, and he loves that idea. It's catnip for him. I suspect it was probably a terrible shock to him in his first term when he came to realize that the American president, certainly on most stuff, not as commander-in-chief, is not very powerful because that president is constrained by the Congress and by the courts, and he just hates that. And what I hope happens, I hope we don't get into a world where they openly defy the courts, but I've watched him long enough. He's a bully, and like all bullies, he's a coward. And when he meets resistance, he backs off. And so my hope is that these 2 judges in particular will just say, okay, I'm going to start holding dozens of people in civil contempt and take away their jobs and take away their wages, and that causes him to back off. But I can't guarantee. I don't know if that's going to happen.
Specifically, how are you thinking right now about the backs and forths over tariffs coming from the administration, what they mean specifically for the financial services industry here in Fairfield County, what they mean for America's pocketbooks? How are you viewing this moment right now in American foreign policy where we don't know exactly what's happening, but it seems as though tariffs are causing us and are going to cause us to pay a lot more for stuff, and there's an awful lot of uncertainty in the markets and every place else.
So the tariffs are an economic disaster. You don't need to hear that from me, and you may not care a lot about the stock market, but the stock market is a pretty good predictor of how business and investors feel about the future of our economy. If you're very confident in it, your market's going to go up. And the market has spoken, which is why we had a bad policy to begin with, which then became a confused policy, because the folks in the White House are smart enough to look at the dollar declining in value and the bond market going to hell and the stock market down 10% and saying, oops, we might have screwed this one up. So now you get, 90-day delays on this product. And so we're in a world right now. I was just up at Cannondale, which makes bicycles up here in Wilton, right? They're not doing anything. They import all their bikes from Taiwan and Vietnam and China. They're not doing anything, right? So they're going to start laying people off. Those bikes are going to be more expensive. Let's not get too economic here, but tariffs can make sense in the most limited ways, right? If China is making a particular kind of steel and dumping it on the United States and putting our producers out of business in a very targeted way, maybe it makes sense to stop that. But coffee? We don't grow coffee in this country. Actually, we do. We grow it in Hawaii. 1% of our market is grown in Hawaii, right? You put a tariff on coffee, you're just telling everybody that their cup of coffee is going up by that percentage. And a car. I'm told that a car goes across the U.S. and Canadian and Mexican border 7 times while it's getting built, right? So it's gonna. No one's going to invest. Prices are going to go up, and it's just there's nothing good that's going to come out of this. But the part in my little national security world. We're not telling Canada and the UK and Germany, countries that went to war for us after 9/11, that you're a risk to us and we don't care about you. And the consequences of that in the long run are pretty catastrophic. So terrible economics, and apparently we're shredding our friendships with countries that have been at our side for generations.
What do you think it means long-term for the financial services industry right here in Fairfield County, to have a stock market that's so easily roiled by a few decisions that happened in the White House?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Financial services is important down here, but I kind of worry first about the real economy, right? I don't think there's an investor on the planet. By investor, I mean somebody who's thinking about where do they put the next bicycle plant, or the next auto plant, or the next, you name it. Whatever kind of plant. They're saying, wait a minute, in the space of 2 weeks, the tariff rate on steel moved here to there to there, and by the way, the dollar moved to here, and I don't know if I can finance in the United States because the Treasury, by the way, now the president is attacking the Federal Reserve. He's not saying we're going to stand by our debt. So the real economy is going to suffer because people are going to say, are you kidding me? It may be more expensive to build my plant in Germany, but at least Germany has adults at the wheel, right? And so I worry more about the real economy, but yeah, eventually, yeah. I mean, the U.S. dollar ceases to be the reserve currency over time because folks lose confidence in us. I mean, every country, well, until recently, every country in the world thought, okay, in a scary world, what do I want to own that I know can be 100% safe? And the answer to that question was U.S. dollars and U.S. treasuries. Well, this week that's not so true, and that's like eroding the foundation of the building that you live in.
You went to Harvard. What do you make of the university resisting the administration and the possible funding backlash it faces?
Yeah, I'm super proud. I'm super proud. I've been tortured, and if there are any partners of these firms, I'd love a word afterwards. But the most elite, powerful, wealthy, capable law firms on the planet just said, yes, sir, may I have another, right? I mean, and I know that it's scary. Again, I'm sort of thinking about, my upcoming stint in a jail somewhere. I know it's scary, but, the fact that you had Skadden Arp's legendary law firm just say, by the way, I'm writing these guys. I'm writing the heads of all these law firms, and I'm saying, dear sirs, now that you've established the policy of, telling the new president of the United States that you will do X, Y, Z, please let me know what your internal deliberations are because I expect a new president. It could be a Democrat. Anyway, the precedent they're setting is insane. So to see these elite, powerful organizations just, what does Timothy Snyder call it, obey in advance? And then to have Harvard, which symbolically speaking, is a powerful thing. Just tell them to go pound sand. And that galvanized, I think, other universities to say, hey, we can stand up. That was really gratifying. I think that's a key part. Remember what I said about he's going to push and push and push until he feels that resistance? I think that's however, it's a symbolic thing, but that's resistance.
But why do you think so many other universities and other major institutions and important institutions in America did obey in advance? What's behind that?
I mean, the interesting question is why are our wealthiest, most elite institutions so prone to accommodating, And, I am super careful, and some folks in this room will tell you that this is true. I don't ever want to draw an analogy to the Third Reich or to what happened in the 1930s in Europe. That's not where we are. But that's another example of an aristocracy, of an educated elite, of a church caving, the most powerful institutions caving to obvious evil. I'm not a moral philosopher, but it's just so easy to accommodate. And you never accommodate by saying, yes, today is the day I sign up for the MAGA demands. You just accommodate by saying, oh man, I've got a headache. And, if I take this action, some government minister, it's one little step at a time. And the next thing you know, you're complicit in something truly awful.
As I asked the question, a couple people in the audience, I heard them say money, and I absolutely get that that's at the root of why an awful lot of institutions would say, I just want to back down. The problem is you've outlined pretty specifically how, whether it's tariff policy or it has to do with giving up our scientific advances to other countries, a lot of the policies seem to be at odds with, investment firms, universities that have made all this money based on being, really good at what they do. And that's the thing that seems to be hacked away at a little bit here. Like, that's why I don't understand the rush to comply in advance, because it's not like many of them are going to benefit long term. There's not even necessarily a short-term benefit when you see the chaos that is happening in the markets. Is there?
Yeah, money is, I think that there's no doubt that a lot of these firms were driven by the fear of losing clients. But, shame on them, right? There are things that, particularly for the enormously powerful and wealthy, if you're going to starve to death because you take a principled decision, okay, I got that. But, who is better in a better position than the partners of Skadden Arps to take a rough couple of years in the service of decency and democracy? So
we have just a couple minutes left, and one thing I wanted to ask you about is, because you've been in Washington now for a while, I'm sure that you have seen ways in which Washington actually could work better, ways in which the government doesn't do all the things it should. Given that I'm sure you don't think that the Doge method of cutting at government is what you want, are there things that Jim Himes would do if you were given a magic wand to reform, to change government, to make government work in a better way?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question, because well before Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson wrote this book, Abundance, which everybody's talking about right now, I was going out of my mind over the fact that I've got 4 years of earmarks out there to build bridges and sidewalks and this and that, bioswales in the city of Stamford, and not a single one of those projects has been built. And, Dick Blumenthal and I show up at the things and, yay, we got you $2 million, and not a single one of those things has been built. We passed the bipartisan infrastructure. Oh, I didn't mention that in my little list of policies. Bipartisan infrastructure law. We built almost nothing. In fact, the pace of building after the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law was lower than it was pre-pandemic. We passed the Inflation Reduction Act, right? Yay, negotiate the price of 10 pharmaceuticals. It was also a massive investment in charging stations around the country. You know how many charging stations that bill 5 years ago has built in Connecticut? 0. And the problem with that is that there's 2 problems with that. Number one, I'm in the party that says government can do good things for you. And by the way, it's largely our fault, right? Because we were the party that stood up for the, NEPA, the environmental regulation. We're the party that says that, there should be, you heard me say what I said about accountability and legal liability. And so we stand up for that. And again, Ezra Klein has really captured this. The party that says we can change your life for the better by building stuff and doing things can no longer build stuff or doing things. That's a problem for that party. And even deeper and uglier, when people believe that government can't address their issues, and now I'm not talking just about a bridge in Westport, I'm talking about unemployed guy in Youngstown, Ohio. When government can't address that individual's issues, solutions like MAGA start to seem pretty sensible. And so I'm going to get serious. I'm going to piss some people off along the way because I'm going to get really serious about getting into a world where we can build housing, where we can build transportation infrastructure, and here's where I lose friends, where we can build electrical transmission, because we got to, if we're going to stop climate change, we're going to start electrifying our economy and build some transmission, and that's going to step on some toes, because again, there are a lot of lawyers. Anyway, I shouldn't make light of it. There's a lot of really good reasons for the regulation that prevents us from doing stuff. We don't want dirty rivers. We don't want dirty air, but we can take a 1970s regulatory apparatus and set of processes and turn it into a 21st century thing that allows us to actually deliver for people. I get super excited about that.
Do you think that the Democratic Party that you just outlined that didn't do some of these things that they said they were going to do you think the Democratic Party can actually deliver on this? Because I think that a lot of people probably say, you've been telling us this for a long time, Jim, and you haven't gotten shit done, and now it seems as though we really do need your help here. I mean, do you think the Democratic Party can do it, what you just laid out?
What I just laid out is going to be controversial, and it'll be a little bit of a generational issue. I have colleagues who kind of came of age in the 70s when these regulations were, and by the way, it's not just regulations, right? It's entire systems were put into place, and so it's going to be a little controversial. What I can tell you is that in the Democratic Party in particular, there is now an alignment around a really important idea, which is that if we're going to seriously address the economic disparities in this country, we're going to get at least two things right that is going to require us to think different. One of those things is childcare and affordable childcare for more people. The other one is housing. And not the usual, and by the way, there's other stuff. I don't mean to make that exclusion, but those are immensely powerful things. And so even my colleagues who are maybe 30 years older than I are starting to realize that if you can't house Americans affordably, and if you can't provide a single parent with an option to go to work and to leave the child in an environment that is going to be a positive and constructive environment, we'll cease to exist as a party, and we will lose our competitive edge as a country.
When I saw you in the other room when we just showed up, I said, how you doing? You're like, not good, not that great. I got to tell you, John, I mean, how are you feeling about all this? Do you feel like this is what you want to be doing right now?
I'm a little bit of I'm a little bit of a crisis person, right? It takes a toll on you, but I guess the best way to articulate this is that, in every decade or every generation, there is a generation and a group of people who are called upon to do something important. It was clear what that was in 1770s, it was clear what that was in 1860, it was super clear what that was in the 1960s, right? And we're a society that puts a great premium on comfort, right? And we're a society that spends all of its time entertaining itself and staring into it. I actually feel enormously blessed that I and so many of my friends have been called on right now to stand up against the instinct that says you're going to be with a dictator in the Oval Office and laugh about an innocent man who has been condemned to a Kafkaesque prison. Where did our country, look, you can talk to me about immigration law, that's fine, but at what point did this country decide it was going to celebrate abject cruelty against the most vulnerable people on the planet? I feel energized and saying, we're going to change that.
Jim Himes, it's been a while. Thank you so much for taking the time with us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, John. Thank you to the Mirror.
I want to thank you all for being here tonight. As we say goodbye, I just need to thank a couple people, but first of all, I want to thank you. I joked about it at the start, it takes a bit to come out on a, what is this, a Thursday night? It's a Thursday night, find parking, sit here and listen to a couple of people talk about this stuff. So thank you very much for supporting the Mirror and for doing this. I want to thank everyone at the Ferguson Library. Nice round of applause for this great institution in the middle of the city of Stamford. I'd like to thank the folks at West Hartford Community Interactive who taped this entire thing and made sure that we got this out to the rest of the internet. I'd like to thank the generous financial supporters of the In the Room series, Eversource, CBIA, Mohegan Tribe, Express Strategies, Hinckley Allen, Rowthorne Law LLC, and the Causeway Agency. Everybody on the team of the Connecticut Mirror, thanks to the Stamford Police Department for helping out today. The next time we do one of these is with Rosa DeLauro in New Haven, June 19th, as part of the International Festival of Arts and Ideas. You can please visit us at ctmirror.org/event for more information on that. And while you're there, click that little donate button in the upper right-hand corner because that helps to support nonprofit journalism. I'm John Dankosky. Please drive home safely.
Still haven't lost that little